They used his kindness for years until he walked away and justice finally won. Just 10 seconds after my brother-in-law clinked his champagne glass and announced to 30 guests that he had single-handedly bought the $800,000 corporate retreat lodge for our family business, he looked at me and sneered. "Make sure you clear the empty plates, Marcus. Unproductive employees don't get free meals." My mother-in-law chuckled, taking a slow sip of her wine without raising her eyes. Nobody at that long, mahogany table said a single word in my defense. They truly believed I was just a glorified handyman, a quiet loser living on their corporate charity. They had no idea that 10 minutes earlier, I had quietly revoked my corporate guarantor signature, canceled the primary wire transfer from my private trust, and instructed the resort manager to hand the final unpaid bill directly to him. As the manager stepped into the dining room holding a leather folder worth nearly $1 million, my brother-in-law's smug smile began to rot from his face. Here is how one arrogant comment destroyed a decade-long web of financial lies, and how I finally let my toxic in-laws burn down their own house. My name is Marcus Vance. For 7 years, I was the son-in-law who stayed in the shadows. I married Sophia Vance, then Sophia Sterling, a brilliant woman whose family operated Sterling Logistics, a regional shipping firm founded by her late grandfather. To the outside world, the company was thriving under the leadership of Sophia's elder brother, Julian, and her mother, Eleanor. Julian was charismatic, handsome, and obsessed with status. He wore tailored suits, drove leased European sports cars, and spoke in the bombastic jargon of a self-made titan. I, on the other hand, was a quiet chief systems architect. I preferred rugged denim, worked remotely, and rarely spoke at family gatherings unless spoken to. Because of my reserved nature, Eleanor and Julian treated me like an unnecessary appendage. They assumed my job paid a modest hourly wage and that Sophia had married down. What they didn't know, because I never felt the need to boast, was that I owned the patent to the core logistics tracking algorithms that Sterling Logistics used for its entire fleet. Beyond that, I maintained a private equity portfolio inherited from my late grandfather, which yielded substantial annual dividends. 6 months ago, Sterling Logistics faced a critical turning point. The company was hemorrhaging capital due to Julian's disastrous expansion attempts. Their primary lender refused to extend credit for the acquisition of a luxury mountain estate in Aspen, a property Julian insisted was essential for high-profile client entertainment. When Sophia tearfully explained to me that her family's legacy firm was on the brink of technical default, I stepped in. Not for Julian, and not for Eleanor, but to protect my wife's emotional well-being and her grandfather's memory. I worked with my private legal counsel to set up an anonymous third-party guarantor agreement. I put up $850,000 of my personal liquidity to cover the deposit and secured the financing for the property under a holding company, authorizing Julian to act as the corporate face of the purchase. My only condition to the escrow bank was simple. My identity as the primary funder was to remain strictly confidential. I wanted the family business to stabilize without making home life awkward. I wanted it to be a quiet gift. Julian, however, mistook my silence for ignorance. He immediately posted photos on social media posing in front of the estate, captioning it, "Vision turns into reality. Hard work built this empire." Eleanor praised her son publicly at every occasion, calling him the savior of the Sterling dynasty. When I sat at the dinner table during Sunday visits, Julian would frequently make condescending remarks about my simple computer work, offering me unsolicited career advice on how to be a real provider. I let it slide. I told myself that secure people don't need to fight over credit. But generosity without boundaries is merely an invitation for abuse, and I was about to learn that lesson in the most humiliating way possible. The official ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Aspen retreat was scheduled for a crisp October evening. Over 30 people attended, including key stakeholders, regional partners, extended family members, and local journalists. Julian had spared no expense, mostly because he believed he was spending money backed indefinitely by my guarantee. He hired a Michelin-starred catering team, ordered rare vintages of wine, and arranged private luxury shuttle services for every guest. Throughout the evening, Julian strutted around the Grand Hall, receiving congratulations from investors. Julian is a miracle worker, I overheard Eleanor telling a group of city council members near the stone fireplace. He single-handedly renegotiated our corporate assets to secure this paradise. Without his genius, Sterling Logistics wouldn't be where it is today. I stood near the perimeter of the room, holding a glass of sparkling water. Sophia was beside me, looking noticeably uncomfortable. She knew I had facilitated the financial structure, though even she didn't know I had backed the entire liquid sum myself. She reached for my hand, whispering, "I'm sorry, Marcus. You know how he is. Just let him have his night." "I don't care about the glory, Sophia," I replied softly. "I just hope the company's operational cash flow can handle the upkeep." Dinner was served at a grand 30-foot oak table. Julian placed himself at the head, with Eleanor on his right. Sophia and I were ushered toward the far end, near the kitchen service doors, a deliberate placement meant to signal our low status in the family hierarchy. As the main course was served, Julian stood up and tapped his crystal glass with a silver spoon. The room fell silent. "Friends, family, and valued associates," Julian began, his voice booming with artificial warmth. "Tonight represents the culmination of my personal vision. When others doubted the trajectory of Sterling Logistics, I pushed forward. I secured this property. I negotiated the terms. I backed this vision with my own sweat and equity." Applause broke out around the table. Eleanor beamed with pride, wiping a tear from her eye. Julian raised his glass higher. "To success, to vision, and to the people who actually contribute to the heavy lifting of this family." "Hear, hear," several uncles cheered. As Julian sat down, I reached across the platter to serve a portion of roasted prime rib to Sophia. Before my fork could touch the meat, Julian's voice cut through the background noise. "Don't fill your plate too high, Marcus," Julian said, his tone dripping with casual disdain. The entire table grew quiet. "This meal costs $350 per head. Given that you haven't contributed a single penny or a single hour of sweat to this acquisition, maybe leave the premium cuts for the people who actually earn them. Unproductive employees don't get free meals." A few awkward giggles drifted from the middle of the table. A cousin shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Eleanor didn't correct her son. She merely smiled into her glass, adding, "Julian is right, dear. Family is about mutual support, but those who don't contribute should learn humility." Sophia froze. Her face turned red with anger. "Julian, that is completely out of line," she snapped, standing up from her seat. "Marcus works harder than." I gently caught Sophia's wrist and guided her back into her chair. My heart was pounding, but my mind was remarkably clear. For years, I had excused their arrogance as harmless vanity. But at that moment, sitting at a table paid for by my money, listening to a man ridicule me with my own funds, the illusion shattered. "It's all right, Sophia," I said calmly. My voice wasn't raised, but it carried across the quiet room. Julian smirked, believing he had successfully asserted dominance. "Good. Glad you know your place, Marcus." I looked at Julian. I looked at Eleanor. I looked at the extravagant centerpieces, the imported glassware, and the elite guests who looked at me with varying degrees of pity and contempt. "You're absolutely right, Julian," I said, folding my linen napkin neatly and placing it beside my untouched plate. "People should only pay for what they truly own." I stood up, adjusted my jacket, and walked out of the main dining hall toward the quiet executive lobby of the lodge. Sophia started to follow me, but I signaled for her to stay inside. In the lobby, I found Mr. Henderson, the chief operations officer for the luxury estate management firm. He recognized me immediately, not as Marcus the quiet brother-in-law, but as the sole authorized signatory for Vance Capital Trust. "Mr. Vance," Henderson said, rising from his desk. Is everything to your satisfaction with the dinner service? Mr. Henderson, I said, my tone crisp and professional. I am exercising Section 8B of our escrow agreement immediately. Henderson's eyes widened slightly. Sir? Section 8B is the immediate revocation of third-party liquidity guarantee. Precisely, I said. Remove my personal trust card from the primary folio authorization. Cancel the $850,000 wire hold currently pending from my private account. Convert the booking from a private corporate purchase to an uncollateralized temporary event lease. Mr. Vance, Henderson warned quietly, if you pull the primary guarantor status, the estate purchase agreement defaults instantly. The remaining balance for tonight's event, including catering, venue rental, and staff fees, will become due in full immediately from the primary registrant on file. And who is the primary registrant on file? I asked. Mr. Julian Sterling, Henderson replied. Then hand him the folio, I said. I am leaving. I walked toward the front entrance to call a car, but I stopped near the stained glass partition separating the lobby from the grand dining room. I wanted to see it happen. Mr. Henderson printed the updated master statement, placed it inside a dark leather folder, and walked briskly into the dining hall. He approached the head of the table and placed the folder directly in front of Julian. Julian looked up, irritated by the interruption during his victory lap. What is this? I told you to send the final billing summary to the corporate account next month. I apologize, Mr. Sterling, Henderson announced clearly, his voice carrying easily across the silent room. However, the primary financial guarantor, Mr. Marcus Vance, has just formally revoked his signature, canceled the pending trust wire, and withdrawn all liquidity backing for this property. The room went dead silent. The sound of forks clinking against porcelain stopped instantly. Julian's face flushed. What are you talking about? Marcus? Marcus doesn't have a dime. He's an IT worker. Henderson remained utterly stoic. He opened his tablet and turned it toward Eleanor and the senior board members sitting nearby. The escrow documents show that the $850,000 acquisition deposit, the $120,000 venue reservation fee, and the line of credit for tonight's catering were guaranteed exclusively by Vance Capital Trust, owned entirely by Marcus Vance. Since he has canceled his authorization, the total outstanding balance of $94,500 for tonight's event is due immediately. Furthermore, the purchase contract for this estate is now officially in default. Eleanor's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, spilling onto the white tablecloth. What did you say? Julian slammed his fists on the table, standing up. This is a mistake. He's playing a prank. Where is he? Julian marched toward the lobby, his mother and several family members trailing behind him in a panic. He spotted me standing by the glass door. Marcus! Julian roared, his face red and veins bulging on his neck. What the hell did you just do? Are you trying to humiliate me in front of my investors? I turned slowly, hands in my pockets. I didn't humiliate you, Julian. I simply respected your rule. You told me I shouldn't eat food I didn't pay for. I realized you shouldn't buy estates you didn't pay for either. You psychotic bastard. Julian lunged forward, but two security guards stepped between us. You can't cancel the wire. The contract is in my name. And the money was in mine, I replied coldly. Eleanor rushed up, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and desperation. Marcus, how could you do this to your family? This is Julian's biggest night. Step back inside, sign the papers, and we can discuss this privately. Why privacy, Eleanor? I asked, looking her dead in the eye. Julian was perfectly comfortable insulting me in front of 30 people. Why should the truth of his financial incompetence be kept secret? At that moment, my wife's uncle, Arthur, a major shareholder in Sterling Logistics, stepped into the lobby holding his phone. His expression was thunderous. Julian, Arthur said, his voice dangerously low. Explain this. Arthur held up his screen. It showed a bank transfer receipt. 2 weeks ago, you sent an urgent email to all board members claiming the Aspen estate required a $15,000 personal contribution from each board member to secure the final closing costs. I transferred $15,000 to your personal account. Uncle Richard transferred $15,000. Aunt Clara transferred $20,000. My eyes narrowed. I hadn't known about this. Arthur looked at Henderson. Was any of our money used for this property? Henderson checked his records on the tablet. No, sir. All payments received prior to tonight were wire holds initiated directly from Marcus Vance's private bank account. No corporate funds or individual shareholder contributions were recorded in the escrow log. The lobby exploded into chaos. Where's our money, Julian? Aunt Clara shouted, stepping out from the dining room. I used it for operational reserves. Julian stammered, his confident posture collapsing completely. His sweat was visible under the chandelier lights. It was for marketing. For the firm. You stole from us. Arthur roared. You told us you were paying for the deposit yourself and needed us to cover minor administrative fees. Julian desperately pulled 3 credit cards from his wallet and handed them to Henderson. Just charge the $94,000 event bill on these. We'll sort out the estate default tomorrow. Henderson took the cards to the terminal. A few seconds later, the machine emitted 3 sharp, rejection beeps. Transaction declined. Transaction declined. Transaction declined. The silence that followed was suffocating. The grand facade of Julian Sterling, the brilliant CEO, the generous benefactor, the golden son, had disintegrated into dust in less than 15 minutes. Julian stood frozen, staring at the declined terminal. His mother looked at him as if seeing a stranger for the first time. Julian, Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking. You told me you were a millionaire. You told me you were funding everything. Julian couldn't answer. He couldn't even meet her eyes. With no credit line remaining, the venue management refused to let anyone leave until the event bill was settled. What followed was a pathetic, humiliating scene. Julian had to stand by the reception desk while Uncle Arthur, Eleanor, and 3 other relatives pulled out their personal debit cards to pool together $94,500 just to avoid having the police called for theft of services. They had to pay for the very food, wine, and party they had used to mock me. Sophia walked out to the lobby, carrying her purse. She didn't look at her brother or her mother. She walked straight to my side, slipped her arm through mine, and said, "Let's go home, Marcus." As we walked toward our car, Eleanor ran after us, tears ruining her expensive makeup. "Marcus. Sophia. Please. You can't leave us like this. The company will collapse if the default goes public tomorrow." I stopped and looked back at her. The company was already collapsing, Eleanor. Julian was just using my wealth to hide the decay. You enabled him because you liked the illusion of having a successful son, while treating the man who actually kept you afloat like dirt. "We're family," she sobbed. "Family doesn't feed on silence," I said. We drove away into the mountain night, leaving the Sterling family to face the ruins of their own making. The next morning, the fallout was swift and brutal. Uncle Arthur and the board of directors called an emergency meeting. Faced with evidence of embezzlement and wire fraud regarding the $50,000 collected under false pretenses from relatives, Julian was officially stripped of his CEO title. The estate purchase defaulted, costing Julian his personal earnest deposit, money he had borrowed from a high-interest private lender. News of the default leaked to regional business journals, causing Sterling Logistics' credit rating to plummet. 3 days later, Julian showed up at my private office building. He didn't wear his tailored suit. He wore a rumpled hoodie and dark sunglasses, looking exhausted and broken. I met him in the ground floor conference room. He slid a manila folder across the table toward me. Inside was a written proposal offering me a 30% equity stake in Sterling Logistics if I reinstated my financial guarantee for the lodge and issued a public statement claiming the entire event was a misunderstanding caused by a banking glitch. There, Julian said, his voice flat, stripped of its old arrogance. You get a seat at the board. You get equity. You get the respect you always wanted. Just fix this. My creditors are threatening to sue, and Arthur is filing criminal fraud charges. I looked at the contract, then pushed it back to him. I never wanted your respect, Julian, I said calmly. And I certainly don't want equity in a company you drove into the ground. What do you want then? He yelled, slamming his hand on the table. You destroyed my life over one comment at a dinner table. No, I corrected him. You destroyed your life over a decade of greed, theft, and vanity. That comment at the dinner table didn't destroy you. It just stopped me from saving you. I stood up and laid out my terms. If you want me to refrain from handing my complete paper trail of your embezzlement to the district attorney, here is what happens. First, you issue a written, signed confession to the entire family and the board, detailing every dollar you stole. Second, you step down permanently from Sterling Logistics and transfer your voting shares to Sophia. Third, you sell your sports cars, liquidate your personal assets, and repay every penny you took from your aunts and uncles. Julian stared at me, trembling. You're stripping me of everything. You stripped yourself, I said. I am just refusing to pay for your costume. He realized he had zero leverage. Faced with the threat of federal prison time, Julian signed the confession 2 days later. 6 months have passed since that night in Aspen. The Sterling family underwent a painful, necessary restructuring. With Julian removed, Sophia was appointed interim CEO of Sterling Logistics. Together, we restructured the company's tech infrastructure, licensed my tracking algorithms officially under a fair commercial rate, and brought the firm back into profitability within 4 months. Julian was forced to move into a small, rented apartment on the outskirts of the city. He works as a mid-level sales representative for an auto dealership, slowly paying back his debts to his relatives under a strict, court-monitored monthly schedule. The arrogance that once defined him is entirely gone. When he attends family gatherings now, he sits quietly in the corner, speaking only when spoken to. Eleanor came to our house a month ago. She didn't bring demands or excuses. She sat on our porch, handed Sophia an old family photo album, and apologized, not just for the dinner, but for years of blind favoritism and taking our quiet support for granted. I confuse noise with strength, Eleanor said softly, looking at me. And I confused quietness with weakness. I am deeply sorry, Marcus. I accepted her apology, but I didn't invite her back into our inner circle immediately. Trust, once shattered by vanity, is built back in inches, not words. That night in Aspen cost me a few $1,000s in legal and cancellation fees. But in return, I bought my wife's freedom from a toxic family dynamic, exposed a fraudster, and reclaimed my self-respect. Sometimes, the greatest form of revenge isn't screaming, fighting, or plotting harm. It is simply stepping back, crossing your arms, and letting arrogant people finally pay the full price for the life they pretended to build. In the end, Marcus proved that true strength does not come from wealth, status, or public recognition, but from integrity, patience, and self-respect. His decision to stop protecting those who repeatedly disrespected and exploited him revealed the truth and allowed justice to take its course. This story reminds us that humility is far more valuable than arrogance, and that genuine success is built on honesty rather than deception. It also teaches us that kindness should never be mistaken for weakness, and that setting healthy boundaries is essential to preserving our dignity. We should appreciate the people who quietly support us instead of taking them for granted, because trust and respect are earned through actions, not empty words. Ultimately, living with integrity, treating others with fairness, and remaining humble in both success and failure are the foundations of lasting relationships and meaningful achievements.